Can you see this book? I got the title of this edition from this book, The Challenge for Africa. I took the title of this edition from this book's title, The Challenge for Africa. You see it? A book written by Wangari Maathai. Wangari Maathai, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Mandela says he hopes the world will support her vision of hope. This was one African woman that died, and I felt a part of me was gone. I loved her. I loved Wangari Maathai. The first time I traveled to Kenya in 2013, I wanted to see her by all means. Then the African Union sponsored us to Kenya to study deforestation, one of the challenges of Africa. So this book is a classic. This book is a classic. I want to read from some parts of the book. I want to read from chapter 8 of the book entitled Culture, the Missing Link. Let me take some lines from page 161. Wangari Maathai says, people without culture feel insecure and are obsessed with the acquisition of material things and public displays, which give them a temporary security that itself is a delusional bulwark against future insecurity. She continues, we see this in many places in Africa today. An example of the destruction to African cultures wrought by the imposition of arbitrary imperial boundaries can be seen in the fact that while most of us know what might constitute a French, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, or Indian culture, it is impossible to speak meaningfully of a South African, Congolese, Kenyan, or Zambian culture. According to Wangari Maathai, her long-standing attempt to understand the impact of the destruction of culture on Africa's current challenges has partly been a personal journey to discover who she really was. Still reading from page 161. It began on my first day of primary school, when I was too young to appreciate the deliberate trivialization of my culture and the political, economic, and social impact of the colonial administration's imposition of their culture on us. I just read from page 161. If you read this book, you begin to have deep rethink of some of your belief and why Africa is really backward. If you go on udarabooks.com, you'll get a copy of this book. We just brought in some copies. So we have abundant copies, because I told myself that these books should be in the hands of many Nigerians, Africans. So you can get this book on udarabooks.com. And you can buy it through the WhatsApp numbers displayed. on this broadcast. Let me tell you more about the book. The Challenge for Africa is a thought-provoking, insightful book. It is written by Wangari Maathai, late Wangari Maathai, a renowned Kenyan environmentalist, political activist, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. In this book, Maathai addresses the multifaceted challenges facing the African continent, and she offers her perspectives on how these challenges can be met through sustainable development, good governance, and environmental conservation. What are the key themes of the book? One is sustainable development. In this book, Wangari Maathai emphasizes the importance of sustainable development in Africa. She advocates for economic practices that meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. She thought of the future, and that is visionary leadership. People who think of the future, they measure the consequences of their actions. And they are visionary because they want to carry out actions of the moment that will benefit the future. That means they see 50 years ahead and they prepare their people for development. That was how Western societies got it right. They had visionary leaders who don't just eat everything today. Still talking about the book, The Challenge for Africa. This book, I recommend it to you. You need to get a copy. In this book, Wangari Maathai discusses the significance of balancing economic growth with environmental conservation and social equity. She emphasized on good governance as another key theme. The book explores the critical role of good governance in addressing Africa's challenges. Maathai discusses the importance of transparent and accountable leadership, the rule of law, and citizen participation in decision-making processes. She highlights the impact of corruption on Africa's development and calls for ethical leadership. I'm reviewing the book, The Challenge for Africa, written by Wangari Maathai of blessed memory. I'm reviewing this book. One subject she laid a lot of emphasis on is environmental conservation, protecting the environment. Remember, she won a Nobel Peace Prize because of her role in protecting the Kenyan environment. In this book, she places a strong emphasis on the need for environmental conservation in Africa. She discusses the consequences of deforestation, soil degradation, and climate change on the continent. Maathai advocates for sustainable environmental practices and afforestation as key strategies for preserving Africa's natural resources. Through her Green Belt movement, she led the movement for the planting of millions of trees in Kenya to protect Kenya from environmental hazards. If you go to Kenya today, Kenya don't have Nigeria's rain. There are trees everywhere in Kenya. And it makes the environment beautiful. That is why Kenya makes a lot of money from tourism. But Kenyan politicians must rise to the visionary dreams of Wangari Maathai. She played politics too. She was one time a member of parliament, and you hear her voice echoing in parliament. Wangari Maathai is the African woman of my dream. In her, I saw the power of redemptive change. That is why this book also focuses on the empowerment of women. She addresses the importance of women in developing society. She discusses the empowerment of women as a catalyst for positive change, economic development, and environmental sustainability. Maathai founded the Green Belt movement, which focused on empowering women through environmental conservation efforts. You could see that movement of women in Kenya. She had a lot of women following her. She could have caused a women revolution if she wanted, but she did it with the Green Belt movement, quiet revolution. So if you go to Kenya now, you have roads named Wangari Maathai Road. I have taught my daughters the story of Wangari Maathai. In fact, I bought this book for two of them. They can't read it yet. I said, keep it. You will understand it. Papa gave you this book. But they know a lot about Wangari Maathai. I teach them about China. I teach them about the United States. And this Christmas, I'll be going on a tour with them so that they will understand politics and power. I want them to be strong, brilliant, smart, and redemptive in their actions. She talks about global partnership in this book. Maathai addresses the importance of international cooperation and partnership in addressing Africa's challenges. She discusses the role of the global community in supporting African initiatives for development. Wangari Maathai. You see the book I'm talking about? I have it here, entitled The Challenge for Africa. That's this book. Let me read from page 162. She says, my grandparents and others of their generation measured their happiness, their material and spiritual well-being in ways far different from today. Their medium of exchange was goats. They kept domestic animals, which they used carefully for survival, and treated humanely, and cultivated a variety of food crops on their lands. Because most of their basic needs were met, they didn't consider themselves poor. They lived within a community full of rituals, ceremonies, and expressions of their connection to the land and their culture. They didn't feel alienated or adrift in a meaningless, highly materialistic world that assigns value only in dollars and cents, because their word was animated by the Spirit of God. They took what they needed for their own quality of life, but didn't accumulate and destroy in the process. And they did all this so that the future generations would survive and thrive. You need to read this book. Look at this page. There were places where I would have loved to ask her some questions, but I couldn't reach her. She was telling the story here. She says, it was therefore as a member of an exclusive, westernized elite common, then to many societies in post-independence Africa, that I began to listen to rural women speak of their difficulties in obtaining firewood to cook nutritious foods and providing clean drinking water and fodder for their animals. And that was the beginning of the Greenbelt movement. It was through my contact with these women that I began to seek the linkages between poverty and environmental degradation and loss of culture. When I began to build the Greenbelt movement, I thought that all that was needed to encourage people to conserve their ecosystem and restore food security was to teach them how to plant trees and to make connections between their degraded environment and their difficulties. And what she did with this book was to use the simple practicalities in African societies to explain development. It's only a deep thinker that can do that. She has on page 171, Reclaiming Culture. But let me read some lines from page 173. She says, in the colonial era and the decades following African independence, the cultures of the African peoples were trivialized and demonized by colonial administrators, missionaries, and local devotees. Then the pre- and post-independence leaders and the international community urged the peoples of Africa to modernize, move beyond their tribal inheritance, and embrace the newer cultures readily available today in films and on television and the internet. African communities have been attempting to reconcile their traditional way of life with the foreign cultures that condemn their own and encourage them to abandon it. Read this book. Get a copy of this book if you can. Classical work on the power of knowledge and deep thinking. Wangari Maathai was a deep thinker. She was a philosopher of intense repute. Wangari Maathai. It's about the challenge of Africa. Wangari Maathai's The Challenge for Africa reflects her passionate commitment to the well-being of the African continent. The book is not only a call to action, but also a testament to Maathai's lifetime dedication to the environment, women's rights, and sustainable development. Her legacy extends beyond this book, as she inspired individuals and movements dedicated to creating positive change in Africa and the world.